The theme of the book is basically to think about education in the context of near-term inevitable civilizational collapse. This is the idea. When civilizations collapse, often they get rebooted, and they usually get rebooted from things occurring in the wilderness, on the peripheries, outside of the declared centers of power. So when you're in a time between worlds, you're in a position where the actual power over the future shifts from the center to the periphery. And it shifts from the powers, like the halls of power at the core of the self-terminating system, to the innovative barbarians in the wilderness, who end up picking up the best of what had occurred in the prior collapsing civilization and retooling it for some reboot. Now, this is what has occurred before, as demonstrated by Tainter and others who study civilizational collapse. We're in a slightly different situation because the civilization is planetary scale, which means that if it collapses, it's a way worse situation than just like having a, you know, just Europe or something go down. Okay, this thing's going down. We have to figure out a way to capture the most essential ideas that could be used to reboot the thing, get them in some kind of safe place and see them through the storm and then seed them. So where it seems like the place to be when the chips are down and society is coming apart is like to be a politician or something, right? But this is actually incorrect. The politicians are captured by the collapse dynamics that are playing out. Their decision-making procedures have been basically hijacked by certain bureaucratic norms, which have been legally mandated so that they actually cannot make the right decision. So an example of this would be the legal requirement of public companies to return as much as possible to their investors, right? Overriding any other possible motive for doing their business. So that's a case where even if these guys in power wanted to make the right decision, they've been bound by the massive bureaucratic structures written into which are self-terminating patterns. So actually, like I said, in those halls of power is not the place where the future is being created. It's actually, everything's moved to the periphery and to the so-called wilderness. And in those places, you have the rescuing and resuscitation and protection of intergenerational transmission processes. This is the idea. Which is to say, in the schools and media and in other places, you can create a legitimation crisis where even if the capabilities are there, you can't motivate people to do the work. And then there are also meaning crises, right? And we've seen this, Vervaeke talks about this. Another way you can fail in intergenerational transmission is that you do not provide the resources for meaningful self-understanding to emerge as a part of identity formation. And so in that case, he could be perfectly capable and he could kind of see why it's important to maintain the state, which is to say it's not exactly a legitimation crisis, but he can't answer the meaning about who he is, why his life is valuable. So now you have someone trained to be a nuclear physicist who's a nihilist because he never had any humanitarian training. He never had any philosophy or psychology or spirituality or anything like that. And then there's the intelligibility crisis, which is just, do we know what's going on in the world? So outside of can we fix the problems that need to be fixed, do we actually have a comprehensive understanding of our shared situation in the world? And is the elders' understanding, is that understanding of in its full complexity being passed down to younger generations? But now understand, if you're an older generation who has created a very complex and corrupt system, how can you actually tell the younger generation about the intricacies of the complexity and corruption that you have created? It's very difficult to do that. And so this is just to say that I do not think at this point trying to change the nature of the functioning of large-scale educational bureaucracies is the best use of serious educational reformers' time. I think these systems are dying. I think the pandemic is killing them. And so I think we need to think in a very serious way about working in the wilderness and on the perimeter and of innovating, not innovating in a way that makes everything go to scale. And then we create another version of a massive one size fits all thing, innovating in a very specific pocket of locality on unique problems and solving those problems there. From these, you can extract general principles, which can be shared across those local initiatives, which I think is very important. But the kind of like education startup model where you like do something in one little place and then you sell it and then you create an educational chain of startup schools and it goes everywhere, and it's like, no, that's not how it's going to be. The way this thing's going to play out as the civilizational collapse unfolds, there's going to be such heterogeneity and such unique local context specificity as far as what's going to be possible educationally. It's going to be very difficult to be like, okay, this worked here, so it will work there, when you have no idea what's going on there. And that's going to be increasingly the case as the economic inequality stratifies, as the global supply chains get rearranged, as the sovereignty of nation states are questioned by large scale biotech companies, as is what's happening now. So there's going to be a tremendous amount of complexity to be handled by educators. So we need to think about flexibility, improvisation, design patterns rather than commodities, and general first principles and first values to move from, as opposed to very specific recipes and blueprints and things of that nature. I think once these things start to occur and it becomes very clear that the kind of mainstream large-scale educational reform efforts are causing more trouble or they're just failing, then I think we will start to see resource allocation changes as well. And so they stay local, unique, and bespoke to the challenges of a particular area. There is undoubtedly a new world emerging. And I'm saying that educators, even though it seems like they're on the periphery, I'm saying the periphery is exactly where you want to be right now, because that's actually this place of hidden power, although it's also an uncomfortable place, and a place, a very precarious place. And so, yeah, so that's me also saying thank you all for being educators when you could have been bankers or CEOs or something. You know what I mean? So like, it's gonna get harder, but it's also gonna get more exciting. And when there's a complex dynamical system in a state of perturbation, this is where that whole notion of the butterfly effect comes in. Sorry to like end on a cheesy note. But if you have a system that's running really well, really solidified, and you try to make it move, it's just not gonna move. But if you have a complex dynamical system that's in a lot of state of flux, and you put one little move in, you can have massive ramifications. And so that's actually the situation we're in now, for better and for worse, because everyone's aware of that. They're like, oh, now's the time to make the move, says the rich guy, right? But, oh, now's the time to make the move, says the educator as well. So this is the time. Like this, we're going to reach a point where for whatever reason, the buses just won't bring the kids to school and the kids will all be left in basically their local spot. I predicted it would be like ecological, like superstorm prevalency or something like that. I didn't think it was the pandemic. And I said, in these situations, get ahead of this and build something like a generator for your educational system where, okay, the grid goes down and you can't get the kids in school, and you can flip the switch and you can boot an alternative digital infrastructure. So, but the idea with the Education Hub Network is, yeah, we can basically create local, and they're calling them pods now, but my vision was actually more the size of a neighborhood. So the idea for the Education Hub Network is to literally refashion and redesign the school buildings themselves into things that are more like co-working centers, computer labs, and daycare and a library and a museum combined. So the idea would be if there's a community center, which may be an old school, but there's definitely a place where people can go. So the vision is not one of children isolated alone in front of their screens. That is a nightmare scenario, which I also lay out in the book as one of the dystopian educational futures that we need to provide, where each kid sits alone in front of the screen and is given state mandated curriculum that is basically, like that's a very dystopian scenario. And so, no, this is a vision where there's a technological backend that's extremely sophisticated. So it's a vision where you couldn't do the educational hub network without the digital, because it provides the cosmo-local, I like that word, connection. But you also can't do the education hub network alone. The whole point is that it is a time and skill sharing network on the back end, so that all of the members of the community, including the parents, who have been alleviated from a lot of their labor by both debt jubilees and standardized income guarantees, to become more involved in their children's lives, so that everyone registers their skills and everyone registers their interests and everyone registers their time. And you have created a time and skill sharing network, which basically creates potential pop-up classrooms, right? So it's like if you imagine a neighborhood and everyone's walking down the street, and it's like people are passing one another, not even knowing that, like, that dude knows piano and I want to learn piano. Or like, that dude knows African-American history and I want to learn African-American history, right? So it's like there's all of these potential educational relationships within the community. What the digital infrastructure of the educational hub network does is makes those implicit educational relationships explicit, and then allows people to potentially get into innumerable numbers of educational relationships within their community, not just teacher-student relationships formalized by the bureaucratic public school, but a whole broad array of community educational opportunities. That back end within that neighborhood is linked to the back end in all the other neighborhoods, right? So in Kansas, we're not just having people teach creationism, right? That we're actually infusing a universal basis of standards into the back end, while allowing customized, unique, neighborhood specific pop-up classrooms and educational configurations to emerge within those. And this is part of my argument that we don't understand what the affordances of digital are for education. We think it's just the screen and like Khan Academy and YouTube and stuff, but that's actually old school. That's broadcast. That's just a new version of TV with way more channels. We know that that doesn't work educationally. The digital allows for the type of thing I was describing: broadly distributed, interconnected networking with large scale memory and instantaneous connection, and two-way dialogical relationship as opposed to one-way broadcast relationship. So I believe there's a whole new class of educational technologies waiting to emerge.
So do you know of any of these networks that have actually started up?
So there are a couple, and if you email me, I can share, because I don't have permission to speak about them. Some of them are quite basic in the sense that they're just parents who've organized in the context of the pandemic. But then prior to the pandemic, there were groups, mostly coming out of like the homeschooling or unschooling communities, which were building versions of this. And a couple of those folks have reached out to me. So, but again, for as long as the large scale, huge bureaucratic public schools are seen as kind of the thing that we need to be investing in and fixing, these experiments will continue to be marginal experiments. So it's going to be that shift as a result of the pandemic, realizing the futility of those ways of thinking about schooling, that will start to shift attention on these experiments, and then they will grow.
I just wondered what your thoughts were about working and being in mainstream education.
I mean, we need all the help we can get in all the places where the youth are in touch with adults. So I guess what I'm saying is like, please stay and help children. What concerns me are those people who are, either leaving another career or beginning a career with the intention of going in and fixing that system at a meta level. So I love people who want to go in and be teachers and just be there and be present and help children. And they know they're going into like the trenches in a foxhole, and many of the cards are stacked against them, and it will be hard for them to help children, but they do it anyway. Like, that's great. My concern is with strategic and policy and technologists who are coming to address the problem. That's basically what I'm talking about. So mostly with teachers, I kind of want to, give them a pep talk and resources and other things to help them help children who have no choice but to be part of the system. Like many children are put up and into educational contexts. They have no choice at all. And so that's me saying, yes, please, for those in the system, especially with power in the system, do what you can to protect the children in it now. But for people who are looking to kind of like get into education, like make a big splash or something, I see a lot of tech guys and finance guys who've solved problems in business now think because they solve problems in business, they can solve problems in education without ever studying education or psychology. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. So please, more power to you. And yeah, it's not working. Like, we just can't run schools the way we've been running them during the pandemic. It's just simply not working. In the United States, the educational inequalities have been so drastically exacerbated, as has the economic inequality. A few things. Yeah, I didn't mention kind of curriculum studies at all when I was speaking. In the book, I do address it. Like, there's two issues. There's the form and the structure and the infrastructure of education. And then there's as you're saying, the content of what we're actually teaching. And so I make recommendations for a very different way of thinking about curricular design, and specifically raising the idea that for the most part, we've had an extremely truncated set of things that we've taken seriously. And the movement towards a fundamentally different way of conceiving of the nature of knowledge, and specifically the integration of different forms of knowledge beyond scientific knowledge, including socio-political knowledge, and also what would be classed as forms of religiosity and spirituality as needed content, are part of what I write about in the book. So this is true. There's a major component of educational reform that has to do with rethinking the actual content that's transmitted. But I'm a very much think like McLuhan and say, well, the medium is the message. So even if we try to bring new innovative curricular content through the old channels of distribution, it will fail. So at the same time we bring new form and structure, we need to bring the new content. So I'm completely with you. It's a much more significant change in humanity than almost anything we've seen before. And that's why it's such a precarious moment, because we don't know what to do. And so this question of how to create spaces between us where things like the truth or, fairness are held sacred. To really know your teacher, you hide under his bed to see how he ties his shoes, right? And the idea there is that, like, you learn from your teachers, not just what they say. They transmit their whole being to you, which means that the teachers themselves need to become moral, ethical, spiritually, intellectually inspiring, right? And again, the seat of legitimate teacherly authority is that. It's the perceptible feeling tone of the teacher that brings the student into a relationship of basically of love, right? But illegitimate teacherly authority is just mandated bureaucratically. Why do I listen to you? Because I'm told to by the institution, right? Yeah, I wrote a lot about psychopharmacology in the context of schools. My second chapter of the book is specifically about that, ADD, ADHD medications, and the medicalization of academic underperformance. And the medicalization of deviant behavior is also the depoliticization of deviant behavior, right? Because if If you medicalize academic underperformance, then you stop all questioning of academic context, blaming entirely the physical nervous system of the child. So it's completely depotentiate the political argument that the child's being treated unjustly and unfairly.